I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer at Gold Derby, and I'm joined today by Karen Pittman, who stars as Mia Jordan on The Morning Show. And Karen, Mia has obviously risen through the ranks at TMS throughout these 3 seasons. She's now an executive producer, but on the way, she's really been put through the ringer, and she's constantly putting out all these fires. So 3 seasons in, what do you think it is that keeps her at this place doing this high stress, emotionally taxing job?
Yeah, I think Mia loves her work. I think she has a passion for it. In season 1, the writers said, um, about the character that this is where she wants to be. This is her world. Even talking about her relationship with Mitch Kessler, which is how it kind of got started, because this was all they had together. This is where they were together. And I think that that's true from what I understand from those who work in television morning news, that it kind of becomes a world in and of itself. And that I certainly understand. If it's a place that you feel like you belong, you are attached to it for whatever reason. And I don't think that Mia sees what she goes through as, extraordinarily challenging. I think she sees it as a part of the workload, as a part of her daily job, which is constantly putting out fires, dealing with big egos, and trying to keep herself on track. So I think that Mia Jordan I think people like this character and connect to this character so much because she is like so many women, so many of us now who are trying to, self-realize, find our ambition, and also juggle all the things that go along with that. And so I think she is kind of a real representative of where women are right now in the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like you can also really see that fulfillment in that joy. There's this sequence in the 3rd episode of this season in which we kind of get to see Mia's morning routine. And there's this moment where she's alone at the teacup, before anyone's come to work. And you can see her let out this very small but noticeable smile. So you can really see that there's still some fulfillment and some joy there, right?
Yeah, I think so. That moment was very specifically crafted to reflect, like, you see her go to sleep at the morning show in her office the night before in episode 2, and in episode 3 you see her wake up there. She's a person who's completely dedicated, and getting ready at work is something that television news producers do, especially morning television news producers do. So it was authentic, it was accurate, but it also reflects her commitment, her dedication to the morning news television show she does, but also to the people that work there. And I find that Mia's nobility, her determination, her grit is something that I very much admire, and I think adds a potent mix of truth and authenticity to the story.
Yeah, it most certainly does. And then I think on top of that, there's also this element of her wanting to, making TMS a better place for the people who are already working there. That's a theme that gets brought up multiple times throughout the seasons, especially in conversations between Mia and Stella Back, played by Greta Lee. And that's a dynamic that we get to see much more of this season. We get to see these 2 women bond, especially over being, women of color in leadership positions at UBA. So what do you think it means to Mia to have Stella by her side? And what do you think these 2 characters maybe learn from each other?
I think story-wise, it means that Mia has a companion. She has a partner in changing the workplace at TMS and changing the culture at UBA. And I think it's very meaningful, having come from this world where it was Chip Black in charge and Mitch Kessler in charge, and I forget the guy who was the CEO of UBA before.
Fred Micklin.
Fred Micklin. It means that things are starting to change, and I think we're starting to see that in our culture in general. Women are starting to rise in the ranks, and what kind of boss and what happens to women when they are empowered, I think is something that the morning show talks about. And excavates in a very specific way. And with Charlotte Stout as our showrunner, I think we're going to talk more about that in season 4 and see what that looks like.
Yeah, and in addition to all of this, we still get to see these women have, honest conversations with each other, because the show is not afraid to explore that there is still like a tiny bit of conflict between, in this case, Mia and Stella, because there's this moment or this line in the 3rd episode where Mia says, I'm the pawn, whereas you're the one who's actually, in the game, which I think reveals a lot about, or maybe says a lot about the expectations that Mia might have of Stella being in this leadership position, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that they both have expectations for what each other is going to do, how they're going to hold up each other's job and fulfill the expectations required, but also create a conversation around, okay, this is what you owe me. This is what you're obligated to do with me. This is our duty to each other. And those relationships are forged through adversity. And obviously a lot of that happened in the morning show in season 3, but also those conversations around conflict and adversity happened with almost every, woman in the show. It has happened over the last 3 seasons. And so I love that about working on the morning show. It's women-centric, it's women-led, and the conversations actually are we dig deep. We actually go deeper than we try to expand the conversation and just really get to the heart of what it is to be a human being in such a difficult and challenging workplace.
Absolutely. And that's a perfect segue to my next question, because, Mia at the same time also gets a lot of grief from her own staffers about, not doing enough to fight for them, about not doing enough to fight for pay equality and for fair treatment at the workplace. And you can kind of see Mia wrestling with this idea or this thought that she may or may not be in some way complicit in some of the inequalities that exist at TMS. So how do you think she wrestles with those thoughts and that possibility? Because she's really in a difficult position here where at the end of the day, there's only so much she can do.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've talked about this a lot in our society and on our shows and in Hollywood. True inclusivity is very, very difficult to achieve if you aren't committed to it, because there are so many areas where there is unconscious bias. And I think Mia, as a Black woman, is starting to learn the areas upon which she needs to show up for her staffers, where she needs to show up for herself. And I think that's kind of what all of us are doing right now. As we become more aware, we start to understand where our biases are and where we need to figure things out. So again, it's another conversation that we're having through the character of Mia Jordan that was reflecting a lot of what we are trying to deal with on our own. I love that Mia is a Black woman who's still kind of learning what it is to sort of excavate bias. Oh gosh, like I'm actually part of the problem. Like maybe this is a plantation with dental insurance, and how have I been complicit in all of this? She sort of had to come to terms with what that has been over the last 3 seasons. And I think we're just sort of starting to hit that ceiling as far as what Mia is going to discover and learn about herself and about what it means to work at a television news program like The Morning Show.
Yeah, and then an example of that we see this season is, of course, the Chris Hunter of it all, because, after an email of Sybil's leaks in which she makes racist remarks about Chris, Mia obviously has to talk to her. And you can kind of see the pressure of having to talk to her, not just as an EP, but also as a fellow Black woman. So how do you think, she goes about comforting Chris while also keeping her producer's hat on?
Well, I think one of the things that we explore in the story is that this phrase that skin folk aren't always kinfolk, right? So there's extraordinary number of ways that individuals see race and how it plays out in the workplace, even amidst African-American people, even amidst Black people. We see it in a myriad of different ways. And what I think that Mia sees her job and her responsibility just through the prism of how do I make this work versus whether or not this is working for this person in a way and that person in a way. And it's a very complicated conversation. I think she approaches she approaches Chris with her hand out, and kind of gets it slapped away, like, you're not doing enough. And again, it's part of this whole conversation that we've had on the morning show season 3 of what is it like to tackle race, pay equity in the workplace, and where are we right now in our culture, and how do we cultivate a better conversation, not just for the people who are being treated unfairly, but also for the people who are in charge, who are empowered to have conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then with Chris, there also comes the added responsibility, or the added fact that Mia kind of pushed for Chris, to be on TMS, right? And then the fact that she's treated like this and that she's exposed, this is for her, it's very humiliating. It's a really uncomfortable situation for her to be in. So all of that, I really love that the show explores it and explores these complicated topics, because it's really important.
I also think it's very authentic. It's very truthful. This idea that Chris had meetings about her hair, that she had to have 3 or 4 or 5 different auditions to make sure that she was the right person for the job, more than anybody else. I mean, we've heard this same conversation about Serena Williams and how she was tested for drugs way more than any of her peers in the USTA. So these conversations around what it is to be a woman of color coming into a workplace that isn't used to having people of color there, or people of color are picked and chosen as to what their responsibilities are going to be. And the scrutiny that's placed upon them. I think it's such a great conversation. I hope we continue to have it season 4. But I think we did a really great job of it in season 3.
Yeah, you absolutely did. And I hope so as well, that we get to see more of it in season 4. And then another element to Mia's storyline this season is, her photojournalist boyfriend, Andre. We get to see some time they spent together during the first few months of the pandemic, which was really a rough time for everyone, but especially for Mia. As we see.
Right. Didn't we capture it, Luca? Like that moment in time where we were all trying to find somebody to love on or something, because we didn't know what was going to go on. And in this incredible backdrop of social and political and racial unrest that was happening, and the response all around the world. I talked to Charlotte Stout about these moments in season 5 for the morning show, and I said, the only topic of conversation that was perhaps, and I felt, more relevant than the pandemic itself, than the coronavirus, was the death and murder of Mr. George Floyd. And how do we expand that conversation? How do we talk about that? I mean, it was already on her lips. It was already in the thoughts and workings of Xander Lehman, who wrote episode 5. But along with this strong desire to be connected to people and feel love, was this other very complicated life that we were living by watching things break down around the world. And so it was really fascinating. It was an important story to cover, not just on the morning show, but in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And then given everything that you kind of just described, given everything that was going on at the time, what do you think it means for Mia to have someone, at her side at that time, to have someone that she could lean on in Andre, was he someone that offered respite, or what do you think he added to her life at that specific time? Because I feel like, imagine being alone at that time and having to deal with all of this by yourself. We see that there's some conflict in this relationship, and we'll get into that in a second. But I had the feeling that she really just needed someone at her side at that time.
I think so. I think they both needed someone. I think most of what I explored with Clive Standen, who was the actor who played Andre Ford, was their strong desire not just to be close to each other physically, but also to share in these emotional moments during this very chaotic time. And I think that Mia definitely needed a respite. I definitely needed a soft place to land, as they say. Having dealt with all that she was dealing with as an executive producer of the morning show, the writers gave me that she watched video of George Floyd's death 20 times. And if you can imagine what it was like for journalists and for television producers who had to watch this man killed over and over again, and to piece out excerpts to share with the public. I mean, I think it really just showed what a challenging and difficult journey journalists, television journalists, are on in bringing factual, good information to the public. So definitely, I think Mia needed a respite, and she found it in the arms of Andre Ford.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's that line where she talks about how am I going to show this to a white middle class audience, right? I think that's the line in the show. And just you can just see it's so much pressure. And at the same time, she has to deal with all her personal feelings. It's so I can't even imagine being in that position, having, to continue your job throughout all this chaos, throughout all this, these tragedies happening left and right. I just don't
Well,
know
I'm
how.
sure, I mean, I'm sure you could. I'm sure all of us could actually imagine. I think it's probably the same
Mhm.
thing for Jewish journalists who are covering what's happening in Israel, and Middle Eastern journalists who are capturing what's happening in Palestine and their feelings, their conflict about, seeing people dying. What a difficult, tragic
Mhm.
situation. And how do we distance, is another conversation we have in the morning show. How do we distance our personal feelings with presenting the
Of course.
most relevant and meaningful facts to the public? And I was fascinated by that conversation. I certainly deal with it as an actor who has a platform. When is it appropriate for you to share your own personal thoughts? And when is it better for you
Mm.
just to not say anything? Do you know what I mean? To
Of
let the
course.
discourse, let the conversation happen. And I'm glad that we traversed that story on the morning show, because it is really important and meaningful conversations for us to have.
Yeah, and we also see it with Andre, where she has these photos from, the Ukraine, these exclusive photos, and then she has to make this decision about whether to publish them or not. And then, at first she kind of pulls back and says, we need to wait because we need to ensure his safety. And then at the end of that episode, I believe it's the fourth episode, she's like, okay, we're gonna we're gonna publish them now. So we get to see it in that context as well.
Yeah, and it's back to that sort of responsibility that Mia has with Stella Bach, who is the head of the news department. Like, we've got to put this out. What is your hesitation? What is the problem? I think that really sort of demonstrates how much Mia actually cares. I mean, we go back in
Mm,
time and see why she cares
yes.
so much, but I think that is just that gossamer thread in Mia's character, where she really does care about the people who are bringing the news to us, who
Yes.
are bringing us this very important information, along with wanting to be competitive in television news and get the highest ratings, right? She wants to
Of
be
course.
UBN, right? Yeah. Yeah. And everybody understands that competition.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I have time for one more question, and I kind of want to stay on, on Andre, because in the 22 timeline, we see that he's like I already mentioned, he's stationed in the Ukraine, and then at one point he goes AWOL, and then suddenly he turns up at YDA. And when he tries to apologize for Mia for, being for ghosting her like that, she talks about how she's, given herself over to people like him before, and that she's not willing to really do that anymore, that she's not willing to really change for anyone anymore. And she's obviously been through a whole lot, especially including the Mitch Kessler, but also, how do you think she's able to arrive at a point where she can stand up for herself like that?
Yeah, I think it's hard fought. I think it's hard won, and I think it's hard earned on the part of Mia Jordan. But I also think it's a reflection of growth in her as a human being. There is a certain point, I think, as you mature as a woman, where you decide you're not going to, my girlfriends and I call it twirl anymore for a man. Like, you're not going to turn yourself inside out. You're going to stay committed to who you are and to what you think is right. And I just love that line that Charlotte gave me in that episode, where, I'm not changing for you, and I think it's, you're not changing for me,
Yeah.
and I'm not changing for you.
Yeah.
I know what
Yeah.
this is. And
Yeah.
I do think that that's growth on her part, especially coming out of what we understood was that workplace relationship with Mitch Kessler, and another workplace relationship with Andre,
Right.
where she decides, I'm actually not going to do this time. And we'll see how that unfolds in season 4. But I love that for her. I thought that was true growth on the part of the character, and I thought it was very a truthful space that the writers created for Mia to really show her heart in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of a perfect note for us to end on. Karen, I can't wait to see where Mia goes in season 4. But for now, thank you so much for talking through season 3 and through your character. It was such a pleasure to listen to all of
Thank you
it.
so much for these great questions, Luca. It's great questions, and I appreciate all of it. Thank you.
Thank you so, so much. Thank you.